Some books aren't meant to provide ready-made answers, but rather to equip us with the tools to find our own. Thiên Kin, The Big Book of Mental Models, is one such book. This work compiles over 300 mental models, principles derived from physics, biology, economics, philosophy, and statistics, to build a toolkit for thinking, applicable to every situation in life. Each model acts like a lens through which we can perceive hidden connections in chaos, revealing how the world truly operates beneath the surface of events. If there's a true test of intelligence, it's not how many concepts we can recite by heart, but our ability to weave them into a network, illuminating decisions that seem hopelessly tangled. This book aims to help you think with fewer errors, and thus, more correctly. The remaining question for you, the listener, is, if you had a set of supermodels for thinking, what would be the first thing you'd use them to change in your life? Now, let's begin summarizing this book. Chapter 1, less. People often think that to improve decision-making, we must strive to be right more often. But if we invert this perspective, the answer becomes clearer. Instead of trying to be right more often, learn to err less. Inversion, a classic mathematical technique, opens up a different path for us. Jacob Bernoulli, a 19th-century mathematician, once said, "Invert, always invert." He realized that looking at a problem from its opposite side could reveal solutions that a direct approach would never find. In tennis, an unforced error isn't due to a brilliant opponent, but simply the player making a mistake themselves. It's an unforced error. Life is similar. Some failures aren't due to circumstances or overly strong opponents, but because we stumble from careless decisions. Avoiding these errors means we've taken a long stride on the journey to err less. But avoiding mistakes isn't enough. We also need to become antifragile, a concept introduced by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. This isn't just about resisting shocks, but about growing stronger and more robust because of adversity. Challenges, like weight-strengthening muscles, are essential for sharpening the mind. To achieve this, an ancient yet ever-relevant method is thinking from first principles. Instead of accepting, that's how things are always done. Break down problems to their most fundamental truths and rebuild from that foundation. Elon Musk once said, "Don't start with habits or history. Ask what is truly correct and then deduce from there." This approach helped him see electric car batteries not as inherently expensive products, but as a combination of raw materials whose true value could be calculated, leading to cheaper manufacturing methods. However, stopping at principles isn't enough. In every project, from a startup to a family vacation, we always have assumptions. We'll build this product. Customers will love it. The market is large enough to sustain us. These assumptions are the foundation, and we must test them quickly, a process we can call rapid validation. Instead of optimizing too early, we should launch a minimum viable product, MVP, to let reality provide the answers. As Reid Hoffman, co-founder of LinkedIn, famously said, "If you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late." Amidst this labyrinth of assumptions, a sharp blade helps us cut away the superfluous, Occam's razor. This principle states that when presented with competing explanations, choose the simplest one first. If you hear hoofbeats, think of horses, not zebras. While truth isn't always simple, most human errors come from adding unnecessary assumptions, a trap known as the conjunction fallacy and overfitting. In reality, we often draw complex curves when a straight line would suffice to explain the data. The same applies to choosing a life partner. Many people set dozens of strange criteria, from eye color to movie preferences, narrowing their options to almost nothing. Yet, a few core characteristics, compatibility, trustworthiness, and attraction, are often sufficient. But even after filtering, we are still susceptible to biases based on how information is framed. This is the power of framing. The same truth can feel entirely different if we hear that the unemployment rate is rising, rather than that 90% of people still have jobs. Language framing, how a question is posed, or even a single word choice can alter our judgment. Sometimes it's not just the frame, but small nudges that guide behavior. In restaurants, simply bolding a few items on the menu can increase the likelihood of customers ordering them. In shopping, we are anchored by an initial price, making all subsequent comparisons revolve around that mark. For example, when a magazine offered 3 subscription packages, web for $59, print for $125, and print plus web for $125. No one chose the print-only package, but its very existence made the third package seem more attractive, generating significantly more revenue. When information overflows, we fall into another illusion, availability bias. We believe that what's frequently mentioned in the media is reality. We think violent crime is increasing because newspapers use sensational headlines, while statistics show the opposite trend. The internet further creates filter bubbles, where algorithms only show us what aligns with our preferences, pushing differing viewpoints out of sight. These bubbles connect into echo chambers, where beliefs are reinforced, never challenged. In such a distorted information world, to err less, we must learn to step into others' shoes. In arguments, instead of clinging to my story or your story, seek the third story, an objective perspective, as an outside observer would see it. Practice the principle of charitable interpretation. Always explain others' behavior in the most respectful way before drawing conclusions. And when in doubt, use Hanlon's razor. Never attribute to malice what can be adequately explained by carelessness. All these help us avoid the fundamental attribution error, where we blame others' character while overlooking their circumstances. We call someone lazy when perhaps they are burdened by heavy responsibilities elsewhere. Conversely, we often forgive ourselves, rationalizing that, I did it because I was under pressure. This is self-serving bias. And sometimes, to maintain the belief that the world is fair, the just world hypothesis, where you reap what you sow, we blame victims, ignoring the role of luck or injustice. In many cases, injustice or hardship persists to the point where people gradually believe they are utterly helpless. This is learned helplessness. Martin Seligman conducted an experiment with dogs subjected to electric shocks in a confined box. After a while, even when the box door was open and they could escape, they remained still, enduring the shocks, their will to struggle extinguished. In humans, this mechanism manifests at various levels. Someone who repeatedly fails in their career might believe they are no longer capable of advancement. A child consistently underestimated may stop trying to prove themselves. But paradoxically, just one opportunity to see their actions have an impact can shatter that invisible chain. Indeed, some social policies have succeeded by grasping this key. The Housing First strategy, which reduces homelessness by directly providing housing to those without shelter, is a prime example. With a safe home and a social worker nearby, individuals who seem to have given up found their ability to reintegrate. They not only escaped the streets, but also saved society immense costs otherwise spent on hospitals, prisons, or temporary shelters. Yet, even with opportunities for change, people often remain stuck in old ways of thinking. Max Planck once said, "Science advances one funeral at a time." A new idea rarely convinces the old generation. It is truly accepted only when the defenders of the old order gradually leave the stage, making way for the next generation. Alfred Wegener with his theory of continental drift, or Ignaz Semmelweis with his rule of handwashing to prevent infection, were both ridiculed, even having their reputations destroyed, despite clear evidence. This reflex of rejecting new ideas simply because they are contrary to what is known or to established habits is called the Semmelweis reflex. A deeper cause lies in confirmation bias. We tend to seek and trust information that reinforces our existing beliefs, ignoring or even fighting against contradictory evidence. More seriously, sometimes contradictory evidence only makes us cling more tightly to old views. This is called the backfire effect. Then there's disconfirmation bias. We demand incredibly strict evidence when it goes against our beliefs, but readily accept it when it aligns. All these reactions trap us in a cognitive loop, no longer seeing reality as it truly is. The uncomfortable feeling of simultaneously holding two contradictory beliefs is called cognitive dissonance. It makes the brain seek to alleviate the discomfort by rationalizing, rather than confronting the truth that we might be wrong. It's like stepping on a scale, seeing an undesirable result, then stepping off and back on again, hoping the number will be better the next time, instead of accepting reality. We rush to soothe the internal conflict. How to escape this cage? One useful strategy is thinking gray. This means not rushing to categorize problems as black or white, right or wrong. Accept that many situations exist in ambiguous areas, requiring time and patience before they can be resolved. Delaying judgment, not rushing to form an opinion, is how to avoid the confirmation trap. Because once a belief is stated, we tend to only seek evidence to defend it. Another technique is to play devil's advocate. In Catholic tradition, this role was created to argue against candidates for sainthood to ensure the decision was fair and just. In everyday life, deliberately taking the opposing side or listening to opinions from people we disagree with forces us to broaden our perspectives. Charlie Munger once advised, "Never allow yourself to have an opinion on anything if you don't know the other side's argument better than they do." All the above points lead to a core issue. We often trust our intuition, our gut feeling, as a safe guide. But intuition is only reliable when it's based on repeated and familiar experience. In new territories, intuition can easily mislead us. Someone familiar with forests might know not to stare at a bear because it will perceive it as a challenge. But if you apply that rule to a mountain lion, the consequences would be catastrophic. For this species, avoiding eye contact means identifying yourself as prey. Daniel Kahneman distinguishes two systems of thinking. System 1, fast, intuitive, emotional, and System 2, slow, rational, deliberative. Most daily decisions use System 1, which saves energy. But in complex, novel situations, or when the consequences are significant, we must resist the temptation of intuition and switch to System 2 thinking. It's here that mental models demonstrate their power, acting as supportive maps instead of leaving us fumbling in the fog. The more we practice, our intuition becomes more accurate, refined by the experience of applying the right models. At that point, mental models are no longer tools we struggle to find, but become natural reflexes. This acuity is the antifragile state in thinking. Each mistake, each setback, instead of weakening us, makes us better at identifying errors. The Challenger accident in 1986 was a painful illustration of misjudging causes. The space shuttle disintegrated just 73 seconds after launch, killing the entire crew. During the investigation, the Rogers Commission identified the proximate cause as the O-rings becoming brittle in cold conditions, allowing hot gases to escape and destroy the structure. This was the proximate cause, the immediate trigger of the disaster. But digging deeper, they discovered the root cause lay in the management culture of NASA and its contractor, where pressure to meet deadlines and overconfidence led to technical warnings being ignored. This is a lesson that to err less, we cannot stop at surface causes. Any incident has multiple layers of causes, and only by finding the root can we truly learn something. Otherwise, we'll only treat symptoms, not the disease. Another trap is the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy, mistakenly believing that if B occurred after A, then A must be the cause of B, but in reality, many events merely happen sequentially by chance or are both influenced by a third cause. In medicine, politics, and everyday life, people easily fall into this trap when they want to find a coherent story to explain the world. Similarly, in many accidents, we tend to attribute them to a bad apple, some bad individual, instead of looking at the bad barrel, the entire system that created the conditions for the error. This superficial thinking makes us miss opportunities to fix structural issues, culture, or control mechanisms. When discussing causes, another model is normal accident theory. In extremely complex systems, nuclear power plants, financial markets, the internet, accidents are inevitable. So many variables interact that just one small link malfunctioning can cause the entire system to collapse. Instead of trying to eliminate all risks, what we can do is design systems so that when an incident occurs, damage is limited and the system can self-recover. Even after analyzing causes, we often confuse correlation and causation. Two events can occur in parallel without a causal relationship. A classic example, both drowning deaths and ice cream sales increase in summer, but ice cream doesn't cause drowning. Both are simply affected by temperature. Coincidence easily turns into misconception, and if we base decisions on misconceptions, errors multiply. In all situations, the golden rule is keep it simple, stupid. The more assumptions we add, the more we connect unrelated things, the easier it is to get lost. The mental models in this chapter are tools to help us strip away layers of artificial complexity to see a starker truth. But as the author emphasizes, applying mental models doesn't turn us into geniuses overnight. It's like Spider-Man after being bitten by the spider. Power doesn't come instantly, but requires practice, setbacks, and refinement. As Hulk says in an Avengers movie scene, the secret isn't learning to transform into a giant at a special moment, but being ready at all times. Once proficient, we can let these models activate in our minds like reflexes, helping us see problems from a higher, broader, sharper perspective. You cannot avoid all mistakes, but you can learn to err less. Instead of being led astray by blind intuition, instead of getting stuck in biases or narrow frameworks, build yourself an arsenal of mental models. With them, you'll be like someone with a map in hand, navigating life's labyrinth without relying solely on chance. Erring less means living more wisely. Asterisk Chapter 2. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. Anything that can go wrong, sooner or later, will go wrong. That's the spirit of Murphy's Law, a half-joking, half-serious maxim that has become a lens through which to understand how the world operates. Imagine you're preparing a big presentation. The projector worked perfectly all week, but at the crucial moment, it suddenly malfunctions. Or you arrive at the airport 2 hours early, yet somehow your gate changes, your luggage gets stuck, and you miss your flight. Is the universe intentionally playing tricks on us? No. It's simply that in a complex system, risks accumulate everywhere, and when conditions align, incidents will occur. The point isn't to complain about fate, but to accept this reality and prepare. Therefore, instead of only thinking about direct benefits, we need second-order thinking, considering the second and third-order consequences. Like building a dam, it's not just about water storage, but about thinking about altered river flows, ecological impact, and the potential for collapse during extreme floods. If not, the long-term consequences could be far greater than the initial benefits. Closely related is the law of unintended consequences. History is full of examples. A seemingly benevolent subsidy policy leads farmers to reduce productivity because they don't need to work as hard. A widely used antibiotic inadvertently creates stronger, drug-resistant bacteria. We act with good intentions, but the world responds in unexpected, sometimes devastating, ways. From here, the author introduces normal accident theory. This idea sounds cold. In extremely complex systems, accidents are unavoidable. Nuclear power plants, spacecraft, or global financial markets all are dense networks of interacting parts. Just a small malfunction in one link, combined with a few random conditions, is enough to create a chain disaster. This means that instead of asking how to avoid all incidents, we should ask how we will endure and recover when incidents occur. Here we revisit the concept of antifragility. A fragile system shatters when attacked. A robust system can withstand without changing. But an antifragile system truly excels. It becomes stronger after a shock. Our body is an example. When trained with appropriate pressure, bones and muscles become denser and more resilient. Similarly, an economy, a business, or an individual life, if designed correctly, can learn to grow from risk. So, how do you build a resilient system? The first answer is redundancy. In aviation engineering, every critical system has 2, even 3 layers of backup, 3 flight computers, 3 fuel pumps, 3 electrical systems. For an airplane to crash due to a technical error, at least 3 levels of protection must fail simultaneously. The cost is high, but the gain is the lives of millions of passengers. In everyday life, redundancy is equally important. Saving money instead of living paycheck to paycheck, having a spare key instead of just one, learning additional skills to avoid relying solely on one profession. But even with redundancy, we still face rare but colossal shocks, black swan events. These are events that are difficult to predict, with immense impact, like the 9/11 terrorist attacks, the 2008 financial crisis, or the COVID-19 pandemic. The peculiar thing is that humans always think they can predict, and after the event occurs, we fool ourselves into thinking it was obvious all along. But the truth is, the black swan only appears when it has already flown by. To truly understand risk, we must look at the fat tails of probability distributions. These shocks lie at the rare extremes, but their impact is so vast that they determine the fate of entire systems. In charts, they are called fat tails, meaning the probability of occurrence, though small, is not zero. If we underestimate them, when they arrive, we won't have time to react. That's why every wise decision requires a safety margin. A bridge engineer doesn't just calculate the average weight of vehicles, but multiplies it many times to account for extreme situations. Mountain climbers carry extra food and water in case they get stranded in a snowstorm. And in finance, wise investors never stake all their capital on one gamble, no matter how high the apparent odds of winning. The most uncomfortable thing about risk is that it often hides behind a familiar facade. We easily become complacent when everything seems stable, but it is precisely then that tiny variables silently accumulate, and suddenly the system collapses, leaving a stunned feeling that this shouldn't have happened. But in reality, accidents are inevitable in a complex world. Imagine an airplane flying in the sky, hundreds of thousands of parts working in perfect harmony to maintain a safe flight. Just one loose screw, if it meets the right conditions, can trigger a chain reaction that spreads throughout the entire system. This is why the aviation industry reveres the principle of redundancy and maintains a culture of transparent error reporting. Because each time a lesson is learned from a minor incident, the survival chances of millions of people increase. In personal life, too, someone who spends their entire monthly salary without saving might live peacefully for many years, until they unexpectedly lose their job or fall ill. Only then do they realize a black swan has arrived. The difference between someone prepared and someone complacent is that the prepared individual doesn't precisely predict events, but they create a sufficiently thick buffer to withstand them. Here, it's important to remember that risk isn't just about extreme events. Often, it's the accumulation of small, repeated errors that leads to tragic outcomes. A manufacturing company overlooks minor technical flaws to meet deadlines, and one day those flaws accumulate into a disaster. A driver habitually runs red lights, lucky many times without incident. When an accident finally occurs, the cost far exceeds all previous benefits. This is the power of second-order thinking. One must see the accumulating consequences, not just the immediate results. It is also why many seemingly wise decisions turn into disasters due to unintended effects. When humans imported the cane toad to kill pests, few thought they would become an invasive species destroying entire ecosystems. When governments impose price ceilings on a commodity to protect citizens, the result is often market scarcity, and the populace suffers more. This repeats endlessly throughout history. What we want is not always what we get. Another error is over-relying on averages. We tend to think the world follows neat bell curve distributions, where extreme phenomena are exceedingly rare. But many fields, finance, climate, politics, exhibit fat-tailed distributions, meaning extreme events occur more frequently than we imagine. When a historic flood sweeps through, or a market suddenly plummets 50% in a few days, people exclaim it's a once-in-a-century event. But if you look closely, history proves such events are not rare at all. It's only human memory that is short-term and the illusion that the future will be gentle. The only way to survive in this fat-tailed world is to live humbly before uncertainty. Never bet everything on the assumption that things will go smoothly. Always maintain a safety margin, a reserve buffer. Like a mountaineer carrying an extra oxygen tank, like an engineer designing a bridge to withstand many times its actual load, like a family saving enough cash to survive a year of unemployment. But preparation alone isn't enough. There's something more important. Accepting that uncertainty is the fuel for growth. Each collision, each time we fall into an adverse event, if we reflect on it, we can become stronger. Just as the body endures training pressure to become resilient, the spirit can also learn to adapt and regenerate. No one can completely eliminate risk, but everyone can learn that when an accident happens, it's not an end, but a beginning of a lesson. When an incident erupts, the first and wisest reaction is not to lecture or blame, but to stop the bleeding, to staunch the flow quickly and roughly if necessary. Then, and only then, step back to find the root cause and patch things up long-term. In medicine, it's a tourniquet. In life, it might be a clear, decisive apology to halt the wave of indignation before it escalates, then returning to address the root cause thoroughly. Sometimes the bleeding control measure is to quarantine the infected area, cut off, seal off, temporarily isolate to prevent spread. In life, it's ending a toxic relationship for those involved. In an organization, it's halting a project or replacing a risky link. In epidemiology, it's quarantine, restricting the movement of people or goods to block disease transmission. Even a spam folder is a simple form of quarantine, funneling suspicious emails into a separate compartment to reduce harm from potential errors. Another strategy, seemingly counterintuitive but effective, is to set traps for dangerous focal points in areas we control. The flippers theory suggests drawing troublemakers to a point far from valuable assets, where their weaknesses are exposed and they can be easily contained, much like flypaper. In cybersecurity, honeypots are built servers that look like system treasures but are actually isolated, designed to lure and study attackers, like pouring honey to entice a bear into an invisible cage. If we can't quickly stop the bleeding and isolate, a chain reaction will pull us into a domino effect. A small slip pushes the next piece, and then the next, until the entire row tumbles. In a world of repeated interactive choices, like the prisoner's dilemma, short-term gains from cheating will trigger proportional retaliation from opponents, ultimately locking everyone into a terrible equilibrium, with losses for all sides. History is also full of examples. The spread of fear leading to containment strategies to prevent the collapse of nations, like falling dominoes. There's a fundamental principle underlying all emergency operations. First, do no further harm. This simple principle acts as a mental barrier whenever we are hasty. Any patchwork measure that only temporarily eases discomfort but pours fuel on the fire isn't a solution but an aggravation. Reminding ourselves of this helps us choose options that reduce the risk of spread and maintain clarity to continue investigating the root cause instead of chasing symptoms. The road back after an emergency is the slow, steady path to recovery, gradually removing the tourniquet, repairing tissues, reconnecting circuits, rebuilding communication channels. We return to the root questions. What was the first deviation? Is the structure encouraging bad behavior, or is it just a bad apple we're conveniently blaming? The answer is often in the architecture, not the individual, and therefore requires changing the design, not just replacing people. Start with small steps. Acknowledge errors without punishing those who report them. Encourage early warning instead of silent waiting for an explosion. Practice simulation tactics so that coping becomes a reflex. Then comes the time to proactively create space for harmless collisions, allowing the system to experience small, controlled shocks instead of being coddled in a sterile illusion and shattering when reality knocks. Like fire drills in a building, like network outage simulations by operations teams, like intentionally sending fake customers through a process to reveal service blind spots. Minor scratches, if any, are cheap tuition to avoid paying the debt of a broken bone. Sometimes the wise solution is to accept localized damage to preserve the greater good, like amputating a limb to save a life. Operational design should allow for intentional disconnections, isolating faulty areas from the whole, accepting limited damage to prevent widespread contagion. This process requires restructuring sufficient autonomy at each cluster, so that one bottleneck doesn't bring down the entire network. And when the smoke clears, the most meticulous work begins, rewriting the collective memory with true stories. Not rosy anecdotes, not resumes that ignore cracks, but honest incident logs the starting point for a habit of quick bleeding control, neat isolation, risk decomposition, and paving the way for recovery. Each storm that passes, we add a smoother rhythm to our response mechanisms. The traces of experience become the new normal pulse. Ultimately, what seems pessimistic that everything that can go wrong will go wrong transforms into a discipline for living. Respecting uncertainty, building buffers for shocks, designing safe disconnections, and allowing the system to learn from small scratches instead of dying from one fatal blow. This approach doesn't make us immortal, but it's enough to get us back on our feet after a fall and stand even firmer the next time. Chapter 3. Using time wisely. Time is the only currency we are both richest and poorest in. Each day, everyone is granted 24 hours, no more, no less, but how we spend it determines our entire life. Money lost can be earned back, reputation lost can be rebuilt, but an hour gone is an hour that never returns. That's why time management isn't just a skill, it's the art of living. The problem is that most people live as if time is infinite. We easily let an afternoon slip away with trivial tasks, only to realize by evening that nothing important has been accomplished. We often tell ourselves, "I'll start tomorrow," but that tomorrow keeps receding. This waste has a very precise name: opportunity cost. Every decision we make means giving up another option. Choosing to watch a 3-hour movie isn't just entertainment. It's trading 3 hours we could have used to learn a new skill, write a draft, or simply take a walk with our children to build childhood memories. Economics calls this opportunity cost. The danger lies in the fact that this cost isn't immediately visible. It's hidden in what could have been but wasn't. Many only realize this price when it's too late. Therefore, the wisest thing isn't to do everything, but to do what you have the greatest advantage in. The principle of comparative advantage, seemingly belonging only to international economics, actually applies to each individual. You might be good at many things, but time is finite. If you do what you are better at than others and delegate the rest, the overall efficiency will be much higher. A talented doctor who washes their own clothes, instead of hiring a service, might save a little money, but loses hours that could have been used to save more patients or research more knowledge. However, not every advantage is clear, and we don't always know where to focus. Fortunately, nature has left a valuable hint: the 80-20 rule or Pareto principle. Vilfredo Pareto, an Italian economist, observed that 20% of the pea plants in his garden produced 80% of the yield. From this, he recognized a universal principle in almost all fields: a small portion of effort generates the majority of results. In business, 20% of customers might bring in 80% of revenue. In learning, 20% of content might determine 80% of understanding a problem. Therefore, instead of dispersing our energy on countless trivial things, we must identify that crucial 20%. But even knowing the 80-20 rule, people often fall into a trap called the law of triviality. In a meeting, people might easily argue for hours about the color of office paint, but dedicate only minutes to the company's long-term strategy. The reason is that anyone can contribute to trivial matters, while major issues are difficult, complex, and few dare to touch them. Thus, energy is drained by trivialities. Another trap is Parkinson's law. Work expands to fill the time allotted for its completion. If we give ourselves a week to write a report, it will take exactly a week. If we only give ourselves one day, we will still manage to complete it. This explains why busy people often accomplish more than idle ones. Urgency creates focus. However, what consumes most of our time isn't work itself, but the psychological tendency to cling to what's already lost. This is the sunk cost fallacy. We hesitate to abandon a failing project, not because it still has potential, but because we've invested too much effort, money, and emotion into it. We fear that if we let go, it will all become meaningless. But in reality, what's sunk cannot be recovered, and wise decisions must be based on the future, not the past. Imagine someone staying in a broken relationship just because they've been together for many years, or a business continuing to pour capital into an outdated product because they've already invested too much. Both are victims of sunk costs, and the price paid is a future stolen day by day. Time isn't just lost in wrong decisions, it's also eroded every second by the temptation of the present. Humans tend to discount the value of future rewards compared to immediate gratification. We know that saving today will lead to a more prosperous future, but a new phone, new clothes, or a quick trip are much more alluring. This, time discounting, is precisely why many people accept short-term pleasures and sacrifice long-term benefits. Those who are patient enough to overcome immediate temptations are handsomely rewarded by one of the most powerful laws: compounding. In finance, it's the power that makes a small initial investment multiply enormously over time. But compounding doesn't just exist in banks. It's present in every aspect of life. One page of a book a day becomes hundreds of books over a lifetime. One push-up every morning builds a healthy body over decades. One kind word spoken daily creates a strong network of relationships. Compounding works slowly, even invisibly. But over a long enough period, it creates leaps that outsiders perceive as miracles. To harness compounding, The key is to start early and maintain consistency. The problem is that our minds prefer grandeur over perseverance. We tend to think of exercising intensely for a week, rather than maintaining a short workout every day for many years. We want to read a thick book in one evening, instead of dedicating 15 minutes to reading each day. Patience with these small benefits is the key to turning time into an ally. But even knowing all this, life is still filled with tasks, messages, notifications. How can we avoid being overwhelmed by urgent but trivial things? Here, frameworks for prioritizing appear as lighthouses. The Eisenhower matrix divides tasks into 4 quadrants: urgent and important, important but not urgent, urgent but not important, and not urgent, not important. The common trap is that we pour all our time into the urgent quadrant: emails to reply to, calls to answer, while neglecting the important but not urgent quadrant: things that determine our future, like learning, building relationships, improving health. The lesson here is that urgent creates noise, important creates value. If we're not mindful, we'll spend our lives putting out fires and never building a safe home. Another approach is the one big thing rule. Every day, choose the single most important task and do it first when energy is abundant. Everything else can wait, but that one task must be completed. This method is simple but effective because it forces us not to avoid the core issue. There's another trick to preserve time: batching. Group similar tasks together. Instead of replying to emails sporadically throughout the day, dedicate a specific time slot to handle them. Instead of running to the supermarket every time an item runs out, make a list and go shopping once. Each time we switch between tasks, we lose energy. Batching reduces the number of these switches, thus saving hours of invisible time. Of course, all methods are meaningless if we don't have the courage to say no. Our time isn't just eroded by ourselves, but also by demands from others. Everyone wants a piece of our time, and if we don't learn to refuse, we'll become victims of our own kindness. Learning to say no isn't selfish. It's a form of self-respect and respect for others, because only by reserving time for what's important can we truly deliver valuable contributions. The irony is that sometimes the very feeling of being busy makes us forget that we aren't truly progressing. Some days, the schedule is packed: meetings, messages, calls, paperwork, but by the end of the day, nothing truly important has been accomplished. This is the trap of fake productivity. We confuse motion with progress. A hamster runs tirelessly on a wheel, but ultimately remains in the same spot. To escape this cycle, we need the courage to stop and ask, why am I doing this? Is it truly leading me somewhere? Sometimes the answer is startling. Many tasks exist only to maintain the illusion that we are useful, while their actual value is near zero. Another form of time waste is meaningless meetings. People tend to prolong meetings just to fill the allotted time, like Parkinson's law. A 1-hour meeting could be condensed into 15 minutes if everyone prepared thoroughly and got straight to the point. But we often start with rambling stories, then circle around trivial details, only to end without any decisions being made. When many individuals collectively waste time this way, an entire organization loses thousands of hours uselessly. The waste isn't just collective, it's also in individual habits, especially clinging to technology. Phones ring, messages pop up, social media continuously opens. Each interruption takes the brain several minutes to return to its previous rhythm. These small interruptions accumulate throughout the day, turning into hours stolen. The paradox is that the very tools we believe save us time become the biggest thieves. Against this continuous distraction, there's a simple but effective technique: time blocking. Choose an uninterrupted block of time, turn off notifications, close the door, and dedicate all your energy to a single task. This time might not be long, perhaps just 30 minutes, but if focused deeply, it's often more effective than an entire day of scattered work. More importantly, time management isn't just about doing more things, but about doing more things that are worth living for. Time for family, for friends, for quiet moments with oneself. These are the true assets at the end of life. Few regret not working more hours at the office, but many regret missing moments with loved ones. Time is also a mirror of our values. We might say we value health, but if we can't spare 15 minutes a day for exercise, it's just empty talk. We might affirm that knowledge is important, but if we don't read books or learn, it's just an illusion. Look at where you truly allocate your time, and you'll know what you truly value. Living wisely means living as if each day is an investment. This investment can be completely lost if we squander it on meaningless things. But if we invest it in valuable endeavors, compound interest will multiply over the years, transforming into a rich life. Use time as if it's the only gift you are surely losing. When we deeply realize this finiteness, every choice becomes clearer. We know what to keep, what to let go. We learn to say no to the trivial and yes to the important. And above all, we learn to live not many years, but many full moments. Chapter 4, Becoming One with Nature. Nature isn't a stranger, but the most silent, patient teacher. For millions of years, every principle of survival, balance, and adaptation has been written into the body of every creature, in the flow of every river, in the cycle of every season. Humans are merely latecomers, trying to relearn lessons etched by time and change. If we want to think more clearly, we must start by accepting that all artificial systems are but shadows of natural systems. Let's begin with a seemingly simple rule: feedback loops. In nature, no action occurs without creating a reaction, and that reaction, in turn, influences the original source. Trees grow quickly with sunlight. The taller they grow, the more sunlight they receive. That's positive feedback. Conversely, when the body heats up, sweat glands activate to cool it down. That's negative feedback. Social life also operates on this principle. The more a rumor spreads, the more it's believed to be true. Or a flawed economic policy, if not adjusted, can send the economy spiraling further downward. Understanding feedback loops helps us know when to amplify an effect and when to apply the brakes. Related to this is the concept of critical mass. Uranium nuclei only explode when they reach a certain density for a chain reaction to sustain itself. Social networks are similar. A platform is meaningless until the number of users reaches a threshold where everyone feels compelled to join because their friends are already there. In everyday life, many individual efforts also need critical mass to yield results. A small group working for the environment might be ignored, but when numerous enough, they create a widespread movement. Viewing everything through the lens of critical mass helps us be more patient during quiet phases and more vigilant when a trend has reached an irreversible threshold. However, increasing effort doesn't always yield proportional benefits. Nature teaches us the lesson of diminishing returns. Fertilizing a plant will help it grow better, but beyond a certain point, adding more fertilizer only hardens the soil and causes the plant to wither. Working overtime might help complete a project, but when overloaded, productivity plummets and errors increase. In investing, pouring more money into an already diversified portfolio only gradually reduces the benefit, no longer optimizing it. This law reminds us that all resources are limited, and wisdom lies not in doing more, but in knowing when to stop. Nature also operates as a vast interconnected network where nothing exists in isolation. We call this ecosystem thinking. Remove one species from the food chain, and the entire equilibrium collapses. The wolves eradicated from Yellowstone caused deer to overpopulate, devouring all the vegetation, leading to soil erosion and altered river flows. Only when wolves returned did the ecosystem gradually recover. In business, if a large company collapses, numerous suppliers, partners, and even entire labor communities are shaken. Through ecosystem thinking, we understand that every decision has a cascade of consequences, and sustainable success only comes when we consider the benefits for the entire network. Balance is the natural aspiration of every system. The body maintains a stable temperature. Lakes maintain water levels through rain and evaporation. Society maintains stability through laws and norms. This is homeostasis, the tendency to self-regulate. But balance doesn't mean immutability. It's a continuous, small, almost invisible adjustment to prevent the system from drifting too far. Understanding homeostasis helps us be calmer when facing short-term fluctuations. A bad day doesn't mean the system collapses, just as a good day doesn't mean everything is safe. Sustainability comes from knowing that the system always needs small adjustments to maintain long-term stability. Every system has a carrying capacity. The environment can support a certain population level, after which life begins to dwindle. Adding more cows to a pasture doesn't increase milk indefinitely, but leads to famine when the grass is eaten bare. Our planet is the same. Consuming beyond natural limits is digging our own grave. The lesson of carrying capacity reminds us that growth cannot be infinite, and wisdom lies in knowing our limits. Nature also teaches us the harsh lesson of selection. Evolution is the great filter, eliminating those who don't adapt and preserving those who change. Birds with beaks suited to the seeds in their region survive, while others disappear. Businesses are similar. Those rigid and clinging to old models will be eliminated. Those flexible and adapting to new tastes and technologies will survive and thrive. Understanding the principle of natural selection makes us less surprised by the brutality of the market and teaches us that to survive, we don't need to be perfect. We just need to be slightly more suitable than our competitors. Within the same evolutionary process is the concept of coevolution. Bees and flowers don't exist in isolation, but evolve together to better suit each other. Flowers emit sweet scents, bees come to collect nectar and, inadvertently, pollinate. In human society, technology and behavior also co-evolve. The explosion of smartphones changed how we communicate, and the need for communication, in turn, drove further development of phone technology. Therefore, when evaluating a change, don't just look at it in isolation, but observe what it is co-evolving and transforming with. If evolution is a slow filtering process, then entropy is an unforgiving law. Every system, if not supplied with energy, will slide into chaos. An abandoned house slowly decays, a relationship not nurtured gradually cools, an organization not managed slowly descends into disorder. Order only exists when we continuously invest energy to maintain it. Understanding entropy makes us less naive about stability. Anything not cared for will fall into decay, and our job is to continuously pour energy into keeping it alive. On a larger scale, nature also operates through phase changes. A peaceful lake can suddenly turn into a muddy swamp if pollution exceeds a threshold. A seemingly stable stock market can plummet dramatically just because collective confidence hits a breaking point. This is the lesson of nonlinear dynamics. Cause is not always proportional to effect. Sometimes a small change creates a colossal domino effect. The caution here is never to underestimate weak signals, as they can herald a great shift approaching. Nature also indicates that diversity is strength. A monotonous ecosystem with only one species of tree is easily wiped out by a single pest. But a tropical rainforest with hundreds of species, when one falls, others fill its place, and the entire system remains standing. Humans are the same. Organizations diverse in skills, cultures, and perspectives have higher resistance to shocks. An economy based on many different industries is more sustainable than one dependent on a single revenue source. Diversity isn't just a matter of fairness, it's a strategy for survival. Behind diversity and evolution is the principle of path dependence. A small initial decision can constrain the entire future. Human ancestors chose to use their hands, and from then on, tools were designed accordingly. Society revolved around this to the point where it could not return to being a quadrupedal creature. In economics, the QWERTY keyboard, invented to prevent typewriter jams, became the standard, even though more optimized layouts existed. The whole world still clings to it. Path dependence reminds us that small choices today can lock the doors of tomorrow. All these laws, from feedback to critical mass to entropy, point to one thing: nature favors no one, but it is fair in its own way. It doesn't care about our intentions, it only cares if we adapt in time. Living wisely means accepting those terms of play instead of trying to rewrite the rules. Nature also teaches us about cycles. All systems operate in ups and downs, a steady rhythm between boom and bust. Spring overflows with life, autumn leaves fall, winter sleeps, then returns to the beginning. Economies also fluctuate in cycles of growth and recession. Human moods also oscillate between excitement and sluggishness. When we understand that fluctuation is a natural rhythm, we panic less during a downturn and are less deluded when at a peak. What we need is to prepare for the downturns even when at the peak, and not despair when we find ourselves at the bottom. A crucial consequence of cyclical thinking is that we learn to look beyond the present moment. If we only see a cold winter, we might think the world is perpetually decaying. But if we see the entire cycle, we know that spring will come, It's only a matter of time. This perspective provides patience and resilience during difficult times. Nature is also where we learn the concept of resilience. The slender bamboo can survive a storm by bending with the wind, while proud great trees sometimes break. A society, a business, or an individual, if rigid, can collapse under unexpected shocks. But if flexible, knowing when to retreat to survive, they will stand up and continue. Resilience is different from antifragility. It doesn't necessarily make the system stronger after a blow, but it ensures the system doesn't break immediately. Another concept is symbiosis. Nature is full of mutually beneficial relationships. Clownfish and anemones, oxpeckers and crocodiles, gut bacteria and the human body. The lesson here is that cooperation is often more sustainable than destructive competition. In business, companies can symbiotically exist in a value chain. In society, communities support each other to survive. Symbiosis isn't a rosy ideal, but a natural strategy to optimize survival opportunities. However, nature also reminds us of the downside of symbiosis: parasitism. Not all relationships are fair. Some species only extract benefits without giving anything back, even weakening the host. In social life, it's the same. There are individuals and organizations that only take without giving. Understanding the laws of parasitism helps us be vigilant. Not all cooperative relationships are good, and sustainability requires mutual contribution. At the highest level, nature teaches us humility. The universe does not revolve around us. We are but tiny particles in its immense flow. The mental models drawn from nature remind us not to delude ourselves into controlling everything. We can only participate, adapt, adjust ourselves to harmonize with the grand rhythm, like a small boat in the ocean. We cannot command the waves to stop, but we can learn to set our sails with the wind. When we internalize these lessons, we realize that the wisest path is not to fight against nature, but to become a part of it. The wisest decisions are those that respect the laws of balance, limits, evolution, diversity, and cycles. When we view the world through this lens, we become less arrogant, less impatient, and more capable of building sustainable systems for our lives and organizations. Nature is the oldest and most accurate map. Humans only need to learn how to read it, not to copy every detail, but to understand its spirit. Because if the world has existed for millions of years according to these principles, then they are certainly more enduring truths than any short-term theory we invent. Chapter 5. Lies, Damned Lies, and Statistics. People joke that there are 3 kinds of lies: lies, damned lies, and statistics. That saying, while ironic, contains a bitter truth. Numbers, often considered the most objective evidence, can become the most powerful tools for deception. Because most of us, when presented with data, automatically believe that numbers don't lie. But statistics are not neutral. They are a lens. And if the lens is distorted, the reflected image will mislead us more than the most clever lie. Imagine a newspaper reporting, "A new drug is 95% effective." On the surface, that number seems absolute. But 95% of what? If 95% of patients experienced reduced symptoms, that's a success. But if 95% of patients would have recovered on their own within a few days anyway, that number becomes a farce. The trap here is base rate neglect. We get caught up in specific details and forget the bigger picture. To avoid this trap, remember that the picture only makes sense when placed in the context of the base probability. If a disease is extremely rare, occurring in only 1 out of 10,000 people, then a test with 99% accuracy can still report false positives more often than true positives. It sounds hard to believe, but that's the reality of probability. When the base sample is too small, even small errors become enormous. The true power of statistics only emerges with a sufficiently large sample. The law of large numbers states that the more trials, the closer the average result will be to reality. Flipping a coin 5 times might result in 5 heads, but flipping it 5,000 times will approach a 50-50 ratio. Humans, however, often fall prey to the small sample fallacy, believing short sequences as if they were rules. Losing a few hands of cards in a row, people believe they are bound to win the next time. Winning a few investments, people believe they have innate talent, but these are all illusions of small samples. Another phenomenon that easily deceives intuition is regression to the mean. In any process, Extreme results will often be followed by results closer to the average. An athlete performing exceptionally well in one game might be expected to maintain that level in the next, but usually they will return to their normal level. If we don't understand this principle, we easily misattribute causes. Many coaches believe that yelling at players after a bad game helps them play better, when in fact, they are simply naturally regressing to the mean. The world is full of such statistical traps. Selection bias causes us to look at distorted data. If we only survey loyal customers, we'll think our product is amazing when those who left are the most important evidence. Survivorship bias is even more dangerous. We look at successful entrepreneurs to learn from them, forgetting the thousands who failed but are never accounted for. We see fighter pilots returning from battle with bullet holes in their wings and fuselage, then reinforce those areas, forgetting that the planes that didn't return show where the fatal weaknesses truly were. We also cannot overlook the trap of correlation versus causation. We observe that children who attend school for more years tend to have higher incomes and quickly conclude that more education automatically leads to wealth. But perhaps the deeper cause is that families with better financial resources both send their children to school longer and create networking opportunities that aid advancement. Correlation does not imply causation, and conversely, sometimes the true cause is hidden in unexpected connections. There are times when data plays a double trick on us, Simpson's paradox. When all data is aggregated, we see one result, but when separated into smaller groups, the results are reversed. A classic example is the university admission rates between men and women. Looking overall, women seemed discriminated against, but when examining individual departments, women actually had higher acceptance rates. They just applied more often to highly competitive departments. This paradox shows the danger of looking at data too broadly without understanding its internal structure. If not viewed carefully, the world of data can become a labyrinth. The more numbers, the thicker the traps. In the hands of a clever politician or marketer, statistics can become a sharp sword, both defending and attacking, creating illusions that lead the public astray. A common tactic is to choose how to present data. The same number, but charted differently, will lead to different perceptions. If the y-axis starts from 90 instead of 0, a small change will look like a colossal leap. If a short time frame is chosen for comparison, a company can boast of strong revenue growth, while if the time frame is extended, the overall trend might be downward. This cherry-picking of data, highlighting the good and hiding the bad, distorts the truth but still appears objective. People also play tricks with units, saying that the crime rate increased by 100% sounds terrifying. But if it went from 1 incident to 2 in an entire city, there's nothing actually alarming. Conversely, sometimes they downplay severity by lumping numbers together. Only 0.01% of the population was affected. Sounds small, but translated, that could be hundreds of thousands of people suffering. Numbers don't lie, but the story told with numbers can bend the listener's perception. Sometimes data is distorted by the very way we collect it. Phone surveys miss people without phones. Online surveys overlook elderly people who don't use the internet. Income questionnaires often lead to inaccurate responses from the wealthiest and poorest. This is selection bias, where the sample doesn't accurately reflect the overall population. The danger is that sometimes even researchers don't realize their sample is flawed. Furthermore, there's the risk of small data fallacy. We are easily persuaded by a few prominent examples, forgetting randomness. A small village might have a significantly higher cancer rate than the national average, but that doesn't reveal the cause. It could simply be a random fluctuation when the sample is too small. Big decisions based on sparse data often backfire because we think we see a pattern when we're actually seeing an illusion. When data is released, the public tends to latch onto what's most memorable rather than what's most accurate. We are more easily swayed by a story accompanying a number than by the number itself. Saying the lung cancer mortality rate is 20% might not be as impactful as a story about a young person dying after a few months of smoking. Emotion distorts data in the mind, making us believe anecdotes over probabilities. Even with honest data, our own brains work against us with inherent biases. If we already believe something, we will seek data that supports that belief and dismiss contradictory data confirmation bias. Thus, two people can read the same report and draw completely different conclusions. Data doesn't unify perception, but sometimes widens the divide. A famous example: during World War II, when analyzing returning aircraft, engineers noticed many bullet holes in the wings and fuselage and suggested reinforcing those areas. But mathematician Abraham Wald pointed out that precisely because those planes returned, those bullet holes were not fatal. The planes hit in the cockpit or engine were the ones that never came back, and that was where armor was needed. This is a classic demonstration of survivorship bias, only seeing the survivors and drawing the wrong conclusions. These traps make statistics both trustworthy and terrifying. If we don't know how to read them, we're easily led astray by numbers. But if we understand and are vigilant, statistics can be a guiding light, helping us avoid fallacies and make wiser decisions. The moment we think we have complete data is often when we are most prone to error. The more charts, the more percentages, the easier it is for people to fall into an illusion of certainty. But statistics, by their very nature, always come with probabilities, not destiny. The problem is that our brains hate uncertainty, and we often distort numbers to make them palatable certainties. Remember the story of Simpson's paradox. When data is separated into small groups, we can see trends completely opposite to the overall trend. It shows the danger of aggregating everything, or, conversely, of separating without careful consideration. The numbers don't change, but how we arrange and view them determines the entire story. Likewise, we often confuse correlation with causation. The number of ice cream consumers and drowning incidents both increase in summer, but that doesn't mean ice cream causes drowning. Yet, media, wanting dramatic headlines, often takes such correlations and inflates them into causal relationships. The public is easily convinced because a simple causal story is more memorable than a complex truth. To escape this labyrinth, we need to learn to ask the right questions when we see a statistic. Compared to what? Based on what sample? Is anyone being left out? How much randomness is involved? These are fundamental questions, but rarely asked. They are the fence that prevents us from being swept away by polished but hollow narratives. It's also important to remember that statistics are not only a tool to prevent deception, but also to open our eyes to hidden truths. Thanks to data, we discovered that smoking increases the risk of lung cancer, that industrial emissions are warming the earth, that vaccinations significantly reduce the risk of epidemics. In these cases, statistics are not lies but clear warnings if we are willing to listen. The problem is that we often choose to hear what suits us. When data is unfavorable to personal beliefs or group interests, it is easily denied. This is when data ceases to be numbers and becomes a weapon in arguments, and truth, instead of drawing closer, is pushed further away. Ultimately, the most important lesson is not to distrust statistics, but to learn how to read them like a map. It's only useful if we know what the symbols mean, what the real distances are, and where the distortions lie. Someone who masters the principles from base rates, survivorship bias, and correlation will see through the smoke of numbers and perceive the essence. When we are vigilant about tricks, when we realize that all data needs to be placed in context, statistics become an ally. They help us distinguish truth from illusion, help us make decisions based on real probabilities rather than emotions. And more importantly, they teach us a valuable quality: humility before the complexity of the world. Because even the most seemingly certain numbers are only our way of modeling a small part of reality. Look at statistics as looking into a foggy mirror. It never reflects perfectly. But if we know how to wipe away the dust and understand where it's warped, we can still see the true reflection behind it. Chapter 6, Deciding. Humans often believe themselves to be rational beings, but a closer look at how we make decisions reveals that rationality is merely a thin veneer. Intuition, emotion, and bias influence us more than we think. And precisely because of this, decisions, even seemingly mundane and small actions, shape our entire lives. One way to step out of the labyrinth of intuition is to learn to view every choice through the lens of probability. Expected value is a basic yet powerful tool. It forces us not just to think about possible outcomes, but also their probability and the magnitude of their impact if they occur. Playing the lottery has an extremely small chance of winning, even with a massive prize, so its actual expected value is negative. Conversely, a decision to invest in learning a new skill might have an uncertain probability of success, but its long-term positive impact is so great that the expected value is very high. It's crucial to differentiate between risk and uncertainty. Risk is something that can be calculated. Flipping a coin has a 50% chance of heads, 50% tails. Uncertainty is something that cannot be quantified. Will a new technology succeed? Will society change in the way we desire? Confusing these two makes many people either too fearful or too reckless. Understanding the difference helps us know when to use mathematical tools and when to rely on instinct and flexible preparation. Sometimes the wisest decision isn't to choose immediately, but to defer, keeping many options open. Optionality is a lesson nature has taught us. Insects lay thousands of eggs, knowing that only a few will survive, but the species' survival relies on that diversity of options. In life, optionality means trying many small projects instead of betting everything on a single one, learning highly transferable skills to pivot later, keeping reserve capital instead of pouring it all into one gamble. But not all decisions are equal. Some choices are like one-way doors. Once you step through, there's no going back. Others are two-way doors. You can step through, experiment, and if you don't like it, step back. Jeff Bezos once described how Amazon categorizes decisions this way. Irreversible decisions require caution, while reversible ones should be tried quickly, without hesitation. This distinction sounds simple, but in practice, it separates the successful from the slow. To systematize thinking, humans invented decision trees. We map out possible future branches, estimate the probability and consequences of each, then calculate to choose the path with the highest expected value. Decision trees don't eliminate uncertainty, but they help us see more clearly that each choice entails a long chain of consequences. And when we see that bigger picture, we are less likely to fall into the illusion that decisions are just about choosing between A or B in reality. Each choice opens up an entire world of its own. However, even with decision trees, humans are still tempted by a feeling of certainty. We easily cling to specific numbers, even if they are vaguely estimated. A doctor says the success rate for surgery is 80%. The patient hears the number and is certain they will be in the 80% group. But the other 20% also truly exists, and if not prepared for it, the shock will be immense. This is expected utility, the expected value of satisfaction. Decision-making isn't just based on money or probability of survival, but also on the level of satisfaction, happiness, and quality of life we desire. Sometimes we think that making a decision is about finding the right answer, but in fact, it's wiser to design decisions so that if we're wrong, the price paid is minimal, and if we're right, the reward is maximum. This is the spirit of asymmetric thinking. Limit downside, maximize upside. Think of venture capitalists. They know that most startups will fail, but just a few successes generate profits that far exceed their losses. Their decision-making isn't based on accurately predicting who will win, but on creating a portfolio where failures cost little and successes yield much. That's also why optionality is crucial, keeping many doors open to have a chance to enter the treasure room. However, not everyone gets the chance to experiment and fail multiple times in life. Many decisions are like a bungee jump, no chance to redo it. Getting married, choosing a major, signing a big contract. These choices are one way. This is why the distinction between reversible and irreversible decisions becomes vital. We must learn to categorize to reserve caution for what cannot be undone and agility for what can be experimented with. A common mistake is to equate all choices, leading to analysis paralysis. People spend hours deliberating over trivial matters, which restaurant to eat at, which shirt to buy, yet rush through major decisions like choosing a career or a life partner. This paradox has a deep cause. The brain easily clings to what is tangible, specific, and short-term, while avoiding what is ambiguous and long-term. Understanding this tendency forces us to focus energy on decisions with real weight. When faced with big decisions, one of the most powerful tools is inversion or premortem. Instead of asking, How can we succeed? Ask, what will definitely make us fail? By examining the dark side, we identify critical risks to avoid. With inversion in decision-making, we see both the bright path and are cautious of the deep pitfalls. Humans often tend to seek absolute certainty before acting, but waiting until information is complete often means many opportunities have passed. In reality, the best decisions are not always based on all the data, but on sufficient data to act. Jeff Bezos once shared that many important decisions at Amazon were made with only about 70% of the desired information, because if they waited for 100%, it would have been too late. However, this agility doesn't mean carelessness. It's tied to a fast feedback loop, small experiments, learning from mistakes, and quickly adjusting instead of betting everything on one colossal decision. Make a series of small decisions so that errors don't kill you but only teach you lessons. This is also how nature evolves, trying countless variations, failing millions of times, and keeping a few that survive. The ability to make wise decisions also relates to how well we understand our evaluation of benefits. Traditional economics assumes humans maximize financial gain. But in reality, we also maximize safety, joy, and a sense of respect. Sometimes a choice with less money brings greater happiness. Utility is a broader measure than expected value. It includes spiritual and intangible values, not just numbers in an account. One of the biggest traps in decision-making is overconfidence. People believe they are better at predicting than they actually are. We think we know where the market will go, who will win an election, which project will succeed. But statistics show that even experts are often wrong. The truth is that the future is inherently uncertain, and the illusion of certainty only makes us more vulnerable. Humility before uncertainty is the first step to wisdom. A useful technique to counter blind overconfidence is premortem. Pretend the decision has already failed, then work backward to find the reasons. Instead of optimistically assuming everything will be fine, we put ourselves in the worst-case scenario. What would cause this project to collapse? Who would object? What resources might be lacking? By imagining failure before acting, we have the opportunity to plug holes from the start. But sometimes, data and analysis cannot make decisions for us. All spreadsheets, decision trees, and simulations have their limits. In those situations, intuition, honed by experience, becomes our companion. The key is to distinguish between intuition forged from real-world experience and superficial intuition born of bias. A seasoned doctor can sense something amiss immediately upon seeing a patient, but a naive investor relying on a feeling to buy stocks is easily trapped. We also often forget that not deciding is also a decision. Procrastinating, avoiding, letting life carry us along, these are default ways of making decisions. But when we don't choose, others or circumstances will choose for us, and the result is often not what we desire. Therefore, the courage to decide, even in uncertainty, is often better than inaction. Another principle: distinguish between what's important and what's merely noisy. Our brains are drawn to urgent, high-pressure tasks, but they aren't always important. Conversely, quiet, low-noise decisions, choosing a life partner, building habits, investing in education, have the longest-lasting impact. How we allocate our time and energy to the right decisions is what separates those who drift aimlessly from those who live with purpose. It's also important to note the role of emotion in decision-making. Anger, fear, excitement all distort risk assessment. Someone excited by a small win often rushes into a bigger gamble and loses everything. Someone gripped by fear often misses great opportunities. A classic rule in investing, broadly applicable to all decisions, is don't make decisions when in an extreme emotional state. Wait until the waves in your mind subside, then act. All these tools expected value, optionality, decision trees, premortem, inversion are not meant to eliminate errors, but to reduce the cost of errors and increase the rewards of success. Because no one can always be right. But if each time we're wrong, we lose little, and each time we're right, we gain much, then overall, life still progresses. Decision-making is not a moment but a process. We learn from old decisions, adjust in new ones, and repeat that loop throughout life, just like nature evolves. Every decision is an experiment. Mistakes are not the enemy but valuable data. And if we learn correctly, mistakes themselves lead us to increasingly wiser decisions. Chapter 7, Resolving Conflict. Conflict is an undercurrent always present in life, from small family arguments, disagreements at work, to wars that shape centuries. All are different variations of one truth. When people have differing interests, conflict is inevitable. The question isn't how to eliminate conflict, but how we face it. One of the most powerful tools for understanding conflict is game theory. It views every situation as a game where each player makes a strategy based on the strategies of others. In this world, no decision exists in isolation. Our wisdom lies not only in our own choices, but also in predicting what our opponent will choose. A classic model in game theory is the prisoner's dilemma. Two suspects are held separately. If both remain silent, they receive a light sentence. If one betrays, the betrayer goes free, and the other receives a heavy sentence. If both betray, both receive a moderate sentence. Individual rationality drives each person to betray to save themselves, but the result is that both are worse off than if they had cooperated by remaining silent. This situation reflects myriad real-world conflicts where cooperation yields mutual benefit, but selfishness leads to everyone losing out. From this, humans devise the tit-for-tat strategy. It starts with cooperation, but if betrayed, it immediately retaliates in the next round. Then, if the opponent cooperates again, it's ready to cooperate further. This strategy proves very effective in repeated games because it neither allows exploitation nor closes the door to forgiveness. In life, tit-for-tat is a lesson that we should start with goodwill but not naivete, and also be willing to let go of the past when the opponent changes. Not all conflicts are zero-sum games. Many people mistakenly believe that if one side wins, the other must lose. But in reality, there are positive-sum games where cooperation benefits both sides. International trade, for instance, based on comparative advantage, can make both nations richer. In personal relationships, instead of fighting over a slice of the pie, two people can cooperate to bake a larger pie. Recognizing what type of game you're in is the first step to resolving conflict intelligently. A negative example is the tragedy of the commons. When resources are common, everyone has an incentive to exploit them as much as possible for personal gain, leading to depletion for all. Fishermen overfish, pastures are grazed bare, air and water are polluted because no one takes responsibility. This tragedy can only be resolved by establishing common rules or fostering a sense of community. When conflict arises, negotiation is the bridge. Here, one of the most powerful tools is the concept of BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Knowing your BATNA gives you strength because you won't be forced to accept any agreement. Simultaneously, guessing your opponent's BATNA helps you know how much they are willing to concede. Many negotiations fail simply because the parties don't know each other's BATNAs. Conflict can also be diffused if we learn to see from the third story. Instead of clinging to my version of the story, or your version, seek the perspective of an outside observer. The third story is unbiased. It reflects objective truth. When both sides view it from there, they are more likely to find common ground. Another subtle skill is the most respectful interpretation. When faced with ambiguous words or actions from an opponent, instead of interpreting them in the worst possible way, try choosing the most respectful explanation. Instead of thinking they're disrespecting you, consider that perhaps they are tired. This habit not only diffuses conflict, but also builds a foundation for trust. Conflict often starts with a small spark, but spreads into a large fire simply because of how we react. Instinct often tells us to either attack or retreat, but both approaches worsen the situation. Attacking makes the opponent defensive and escalates, while retreating allows the problem to simmer and explode later. To resolve conflict, we need a different language, the language of understanding and structure. Repeated games teach us that if we only think about short-term wins and losses, conflict will persist indefinitely. But if we think about the long-term relationship, a tit-for-tat strategy that is also ready to forgive can create a positive spiral. That's why in many negotiations, after tough blows, a way out is always left open for the opponent to return to cooperation. Without an exit, the other side will fight to the end, and both will be exhausted. It's also important to distinguish between zero-sum games and positive-sum games. In many situations, we mistakenly think our gain can only come at another's expense. But in reality, a a clever solution can benefit both. In marriage, instead of arguing over who is right or wrong, sometimes the solution is to change how responsibilities are shared so both feel more comfortable. In business, two companies can collaborate to grow the market instead of fighting for every customer. Confusing the type of game makes many conflicts unnecessarily fierce. The tragedy of the commons is another illustration of the cost of selfish conflict. When each person only thinks of their own gain, the entire system collapses. Dry rivers, deforested lands, polluted air, all are consequences of unchecked exploitation. Solutions only appear when all parties realize that protecting the common good is protecting themselves. Here, rules and collective commitment are the only way to maintain balance. Negotiation, therefore, is the art of transforming conflict from a zero-sum game into a positive-sum game. The most important tool in our hands is BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Knowing your BATNA means you're not afraid of being coerced. Guessing your opponent's BATNA helps you know their stopping point. In successful negotiations, people always enter the table with a clear BATNA. It's the lifeline that keeps us from being drowned by disadvantage. But numbers and rationality alone are not always enough to resolve conflict. Often, the problem lies in the story each side tells themselves. I am the victim, they are the bad guy. I just want fairness while they are greedy. These stories lock us into our own perspectives. To unlock them, we need the third story. This is the story an outside observer would tell, not taking sides. When both parties step out of their own stories to look at the third story, a new space opens up a space for shared truth. Similarly, how we interpret others' actions determines the level of tension. If we choose the worst interpretation, that they are malicious, that they are intentionally harming us, conflict will erupt. But if we choose the most respectful interpretation, that perhaps they are stressed or simply misunderstood, we will react more gently. This is the most respectful interpretation. It doesn't instantly turn enemies into friends, but it keeps us from sliding into a spiral of revenge. When combining game theory, BATNA, the third story, and most respectful interpretation, we gradually realize that resolving conflict is not just about extinguishing a fire, but about rebuilding the ground. Because every conflict leaves residual effects. Trust is lost, self-esteem is wounded, relationships are fractured. Only by handling it with respect and structure can we transform conflict into a stepping stone for deeper cooperation. The hardest part of conflict isn't the problem itself, but the emotions swirling around it. A harsh word can become tinder. A scornful look can turn into a storm. When emotions are pushed to an extreme, rationality retreats to the background, and all theoretical tools become useless. Therefore, one of the most crucial steps in conflict resolution is to de-escalate emotions, creating space for rationality to return. The skill here is learning to separate the person from the problem. We often equate the opponent with their recent actions. He's a betrayer, she's selfish. But the truth is, actions are merely manifestations in specific circumstances. If we separate the person from the behavior, we have the opportunity to focus on what truly needs to be resolved. Interests, needs, goals, instead of directing all anger at an individual. Wise negotiation often proceeds from interests, not positions. A position is what you declare. I want this. An interest is what you truly need. Safety, fairness, recognition. When both sides are focused only on defending their positions, conflict becomes a fruitless tug-of-war. But when they sit down together, set aside slogans, and look at interests, the door to cooperation opens. It's also important to learn to put yourself in someone else's shoes. This sounds old-fashioned, but in conflict, few actually do it. Most of us listen to refute, not to understand. But only through deep listening do we see that the opponent also has fears, things they want to protect, and legitimate aspirations. Then we stop seeing them as an enemy and instead see them as a person caught in their own situation. Sometimes, the best solution to conflict isn't compromise but restructuring the game. Instead of asking who wins and who loses, ask, is there a way for both to win? This isn't always possible, but it's often more frequent than we think. Just changing the frame from zero-sum to positive-sum turns conflict into an opportunity. The biggest lesson is that conflict is not the enemy. It's a signal that the system needs adjustment. Families have conflicts because needs are unmet. Organizations have conflicts because rules are unsuitable. Societies have conflicts because injustice is unaddressed. If we listen, every conflict is a mirror reflecting truth. If we handle it well, it becomes a stepping stone for the system to become more robust. Resolving conflict, therefore, is the art of living with disagreement. It doesn't promise a world of absolute peace, but teaches us how to navigate a stormy sea. By using tools from game theory, tit for tat, BATNA, the third story, and most respectful interpretation, we don't eliminate conflict, but transform it into a driving force to understand each other more deeply, cooperate more skillfully, and grow more mature. Chapter 8, Unleashing Human Potential. Human potential is like a seed buried under thick soil. If you only look from the outside, no one would guess it could sprout, grow, and become a shade-giving tree. But if planted in the right soil, watered with suitable streams, and exposed to just enough light, that seed will unleash a vitality it never knew it possessed. Humans are the same. No one knows how far they can go until they are placed in the right environment and encouraged correctly. In daily life, people often assess abilities based on the present, a good or bad employee, a smart or dull student. But that's just a snapshot, not a long-term film. The truth is, latent potential depends on the collective context. As the ancient saying goes, it takes a village to raise a child. This isn't just an educational philosophy, but a psychological truth. The surrounding environment can be both wings and shackles. An organization that encourages learning, where mistakes are seen as stepping stones to progress, will make people dare to experiment and innovate. Conversely, a place where errors are punished, where everyone worries about covering themselves, will stifle all initiatives. Many psychological studies show that the same individual, placed in two different environments, can exhibit completely opposite results. The next story is about who goes where. Not everyone can do everything. The challenge isn't finding the best person, but putting the right person in the right role. It's like a soccer team. It doesn't matter how many stars you have, but whether there's someone willing to play goalkeeper, someone who knows how to coordinate so the whole team acts as one unit. In work, too, if a creative engineer is forced into an administrative management role, they will quickly burn out and lose motivation. Conversely, if placed where imagination is encouraged, they can flourish and create breakthroughs. Placing the right person in the right place isn't blind art, but a science of arrangement based on keen observation. Some people don't stand out in every meeting but shine when working one-on-one. Some are good at starting projects but lack patience in maintaining them. Some seem ordinary but become leaders in a crisis. The question is whether leadership recognizes and adjusts. A common mistake is labeling an individual as incompetent when in reality, they are simply in the wrong position. Of course, even when placed correctly, potential cannot bloom without practice. Deliberate practice, not mechanical repetition, is what makes the difference. It means focusing on weaknesses, receiving continuous feedback, and correcting errors immediately. A violinist doesn't just play the piece they're already good at over and over. They stop at difficult passages, play slowly, get feedback from their teacher, and try again. That's how geniuses are made. Persistent, structured practice over thousands of hours. Feedback here acts as a mirror. Without a mirror, we don't know where we're going wrong. But not all mirrors reflect accurately. Vague, ambiguous feedback only confuses us. Specific, constructive feedback leads to progress. In many organizations, a one-on-one conversation between a manager and an employee, if conducted correctly, can be more powerful than dozens of training sessions. Because in that moment, people feel seen, heard, and have an opportunity to adjust their direction. If practice is the foundation, then belief is the key to unlocking the door to potential. Psychology calls this the Pygmalion effect. When teachers believe a student has special abilities, that student will often strive harder, and their performance actually improves. Others' belief turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy. Conversely, the golem effect of low expectations also operates cruelly. If a child is considered useless, they easily live up to that label. Expectations become either shackles or a launchpad. This is also why good leaders often seek to ignite belief in others. They don't offer empty flattery but set specific expectations, just high enough to motivate, yet realistic enough not to cause people to break. A manager who trusts their employees, gives them challenging tasks, and provides timely support will often see results far exceeding predictions. However, in the journey to unlock potential, people are often blocked by a familiar ghost: imposter syndrome. Many individuals, despite having genuine abilities, constantly feel they are unworthy, that their success is just luck. This feeling prevents them from reaching further, self-limiting themselves. Paradoxically, this syndrome is most common among outstanding individuals. Because the further they advance, the more they see the vast unexplored gaps, and the feeling of smallness torments them even more. To confront this ghost, a change in perspective is needed. Instead of viewing success as proof of perfection, see it as proof of effort. Instead of asking, "Am I truly good enough?" ask, "What have I learned and what more will I learn?" Shifting from self-obsession to a focus on progress helps people escape the cage of self-doubt. Alongside imposter syndrome is the Dunning-Kruger effect. Less competent people often have excessive self-confidence. They don't know what they don't know, leading to faulty judgments, yet they remain convinced of their opinions. In the workplace, this has significant consequences. The ignorant dominate, while the knowledgeable remain silent due to self-doubt. To avoid this trap, organizations need to build a culture of honest feedback, where people can point out each other's blind spots without fear of offense. All potential needs common ground to sprout. An organizational culture where "together we thrive" allows a group of individually brilliant people to flourish. If the culture is one of rivalry, secrecy, and blame, the entire collective will be exhausted. Conversely, in a culture of trust and openness, where small failures are seen as lessons rather than sins, individuals will dare to experiment, innovate, and the collective results will far exceed the sum of individual abilities. Look at scientific research teams, where great discoveries don't come from a single genius, but from a collective that knows how to collaborate, debate, and arrive at truth together. Or sports teams, where a star can create moments, but the whole team creates long-term victory. Organizational culture is the air we breathe. If fresh, vitality spreads; if toxic, all budding growth withers. Human potential is not only unleashed through expectation, practice, culture, or feedback, but also through subtle mechanisms of synergy within the collective. When belief and skills connect, a superior power emerges, a power that no single individual can possess. Imagine an orchestra. Each musician only controls their own instrument, but under the conductor's baton, the sounds harmonize to create a magnificent symphony. In a work environment, too, leadership isn't just about commanding, but about setting the rhythm so that each individual maximizes their strengths and complements others. When the ego steps back, we advance 10 steps. Another factor that helps people unleash potential is the ability to accept mistakes. No creativity is born in an environment of fear. Edison once said he didn't fail, he just found thousands of ways that didn't work. If organizational culture punishes every error, people will choose safety. No one will dare to take risks for innovation, but if mistakes are seen as necessary experiments, each failure becomes a brick laid for success. Then, progress is no longer an individual effort, but a collective achievement. Everyone in the organization becomes a mirror for others to see their own blind spots. This multidirectional feedback is the heat needed to forge steel into a sword. However, potential does not always bloom naturally. Sometimes people lock themselves in a box of habit and fear. Here, the role of a leader is to unlock, not through commands, but through encouragement and asking the right questions. A good leader knows that "can you do it?" will kill confidence, but "how will you try?" will spark ideas. Small differences in language can create big differences in results. And finally, what truly unlocks potential is not pressure, but belief in meaning. When people believe that what they do has value, no matter how difficult, they will find the energy. Meaning is the fuel of perseverance. It keeps teachers in classrooms despite low pay, doctors awake all night at bedsides, artists persistently creating even if their work goes unrecognized. Unlocking human potential, ultimately, is about unlocking the feeling that one's life is contributing to something greater than oneself. All these models from expectation, practice, culture, feedback to meaning combine into one message. Potential is never a fixed asset. It's a seed, and its fate depends on the soil, water, light, and the nurturing hand. When people are placed in the right environment, challenged appropriately, trusted, and guided, they will transcend limits they once thought impossible. Asterisk Chapter 9. Agility, your market power. Market power is like an invisible gravitational force. When large enough, it pulls everything towards it. We often admire giant companies, wondering why they can dominate entire industries for decades. The answer isn't always in the best product or the most cutting-edge technology, but in their ability to build and exploit network affects the secret that transforms the market from a fair game into a winner-take-most game. Imagine the first telephone ever invented. It was almost useless because there was no one to call. Add a second one, and value suddenly appears. Two people can talk. Add a third, then a fourth, and the value increases not linearly but exponentially. This is the spirit of Metcalfe's law. The value of a network is proportional to the square of the number of connected nodes. When the number of users reaches critical mass, the network explodes like fire meeting wind, and latecomers have almost no chance to squeeze in. A modern example is social media. A platform might struggle initially, but once your friends are there, you feel compelled to join to avoid being left out. Once the user base crosses a threshold, all new competitors are crushed by the network effect. That's why Facebook could expand globally in just a few years, while countless other social networks died, even if their interfaces were more appealing. Market power doesn't just come from networks, but also from the moats businesses build to protect their position. It could be proprietary data, high switching costs that make customers reluctant to leave, or a brand deeply embedded in the public consciousness. Once the moat is wide enough, competitors struggle to cross it. But moats also have a downside. Sometimes they are reinforced by regulatory capture, where regulations are manipulated by special interests to protect the powerful. In such cases, the only antidote is the light of transparency, which can expose and weaken the appropriation of power. The interesting thing is that in many markets, it's winner-take-most, not winner-take-all. This means one or a few main players capture the majority of profits, while the rest are fragmented among weaker contenders. But no throne is eternal. History has seen giants, once thought immortal, eventually fall. Kodak was once a film empire, but when the digital era emerged, their moat lost its value. Intel once dominated the microprocessor market, but then faced changes in mobile technology. Moats can be deep, but if the river changes course, the moat becomes meaningless. That's why market power is not just about building, but also about maintaining and adapting. This leads to a crucial idea. Vision without execution is merely hallucination. A company can paint a dazzling picture of the future, but if it doesn't know how to turn it into a concrete strategy, everything remains a dream. Conversely, those who can turn vision into reality will use it as leverage to expand, while competitors are still busy dreaming. To understand market power, imagine it as a force field surrounding a business. Once activated, this field both attracts customers and repels competitors, creating a dominant position. But the interesting thing is that this force field doesn't arise naturally. It must be nurtured and strengthened by many interwoven mechanisms. The first mechanism is switching costs. Once customers have invested too much in an ecosystem data, habits, connections, they will be reluctant to leave, even if there are better alternatives. Think about switching from one operating system to another. Applications must be repurchased, data transferred, time spent learning. This inconvenience is an invisible barrier that keeps customers tied. The second mechanism is trust and brand. Humans are social creatures. We trust what is familiar. A brand associated with safety or prestige can maintain its position even when its products are no longer absolutely superior. That's why companies with strong brands almost create a psychological moat that makes it difficult for customers to leave. The third mechanism is expanding network effects. As more users join, the ecosystem grows richer in value, not just in quantity but in the quality of connections. In an electronic payment network, value isn't just in many users, but in many retailers, banks, and services participating together. The more links, the stronger the network, and the harder it is for new competitors to penetrate. However, the moment a business reaches its peak is often the most dangerous because success easily breeds complacency. Leaders believe their moat is eternal and thus ignore market signals of change. Kodak didn't fail to see digital imaging technology, they were even among the first to research it. but too enamored with film profits, they stifled their own innovation. The result? The empire collapsed before the very technology they pioneered. This is the dark side of power. It creates an illusion of invincibility. To avoid this trap, businesses must constantly re-examine their force field. Is the network effect still strong? Is the moat still deep? Do new competitors have a way to break the rules of the game? Business history is replete with giants that crumbled simply because they ignored this question. Another factor contributing to market power is legal regulation. When corporations become too large, they tend to influence the rules of the game to protect themselves. This is regulatory capture. Laws, meant to protect the public, become swayed to protect the powerful. In such cases, sunlight transparency and independent oversight is the only way to weaken distorted monopolies. Otherwise, the force field becomes a cage that locks down the entire market, stifling innovation. But if skillfully applied, the force field isn't just for defense but for expansion. Businesses can transform market share into an ecosystem, radiating from a core product to services, from one platform expanding into an entire universe. Apple started with computers, then the iPhone, then the App Store, then a service ecosystem. Each product isn't sold in isolation, but tightly integrated with the entire network, making it increasingly difficult for users to leave. Market power is not just about defensive capability, but also the art of offense. Knowing when to concentrate effort to cross a threshold, when to patiently wait for the market to mature. In many cases, the secret lies not in a groundbreaking product, but in the timing of activating the force field. Imagine a network that hasn't reached enough users. It's like a small fire that hasn't caught. At that point, the wise strategy is initial support. Free offerings, encouraging participation, even incurring losses to reach critical mass. Once the threshold is met, the fire will ignite on its own, unstoppable. Many tech platforms have chosen this path, willing to burn billions of dollars to attract initial users, because they understand that when the force field is strong enough, it will sustain itself. But once the force field is activated, the problem is no longer how to grow, but how not to self-destruct. Power easily turns into arrogance, making businesses forget the market's inherently dynamic nature. Every moat will eventually erode, every network can eventually be replaced. History is not lacking in empires that collapsed simply because they believed themselves immortal. The lesson is that the force field must be continuously nurtured, not just by caring for products, but by listening to users, refreshing the experience, and creating additional value. Otherwise, competitors will find ways to break barriers, create technology that makes switching costs almost zero, or build new experiences so compelling that users are willing to abandon the old. Market power is also like a kind of political power. It's only sustainable when it has legitimacy. If a business relies solely on tricks or legal manipulation, the public will resist, the government will intervene, and the force field will collapse. But if a business builds trust based on real value, useful products, reliable service, and transparent commitments, that power will be supported by the public and have a chance to endure. The greatest paradox is that to maintain market power, one sometimes has to self-disrupt. Apple was willing to kill the iPod to launch the iPhone. Netflix was willing to abandon DVD rental to move into streaming. They understood that if they didn't self-disrupt, someone else would. A force field, to endure, must transform with the world. Looking back, we see a clear picture. Market power is not a matter of luck, but the result of understanding and applying the principles of network effects, switching costs, brand, regulation, ecosystems, and disciplined execution. Combining them, businesses create a force field, an attractive zone that both protects and amplifies value. But the crucial thing is that no force field is eternal. It must always be nurtured, refreshed, and adapted. Whoever forgets this will soon become history, while whoever remembers will continue to bend the market to their will. Thank you for patiently joining me until these final pages. Listening to a book isn't just about receiving information, it's an experiment in perception. We immerse ourselves in someone else's world of thought, only to then reflect on how we think and live ourselves. I cherish every minute you've dedicated to this journey. If this book has sparked a glimmer of insight, a new question, or simply a moment to pause and look deeper into everyday life, I hope you'll leave a review or comment. Not as a formality, but as a way for you to send feedback into this vast loop of knowledge, where every voice has the potential to shed light on something for those who come after. And because knowledge never stops, I want to invite you to become a co-creator. Please suggest books you'd like to hear, books you'd like us to explore together, because these very suggestions will open unexpected turns, leading us to realms of ideas that perhaps I, alone, would never have conceived. We have concluded one journey, but it is only the beginning of the next. Would you like to try to see which book will be the new key to unlock your mind's door?